The Battle of Jerusalem occurred during the British Empire's Jerusalem operations against the Ottoman Empire, when fighting for the city developed from the 17th of November, continuing after the surrender until the 30th of December 1917, to secure the final objective of the southern Palestine offensive during the Sinai and Palestine campaign of World War I. Before Jerusalem could be secured, two battles were recognized by the British as being fought in the Judean hills to the north and east of the Hebron Junction station line. These were the Battle of Nebi Samuel from 17 to the 24th of November and the defense of Jerusalem from 26 to the 30th of December 1917. They also recognized within these Jerusalem operations, the successful second attempt on 21 and the 22nd of December 1917 to advance across the Nahr as the Battle of Jaffa, although Jaffa had been occupied as a consequence of the Battle of Moga Ridge on the 16th of November. This series of battles was successfully fought by the British Empire's 20th Corps, 21st Corps, and the Desert Mounted Corps against strong opposition from the Yildirim Army Group's 7th Army in the Judean Hills and the 8th Army north of Jaffa on the Mediterranean coast. The loss of Jaffa and Jerusalem, together with the loss of 50 miles of territory during the Egyptian Expeditionary Force advance from Gaza, after the capture of Beersheba, Gaza, Harera and Sheria, Tel El-Kuwailf and the Battle of Moga Ridge, constituted a grave setback for the Ottoman army and the Ottoman Empire. As a result of these victories, British Empire forces captured Jerusalem and established a new strategically strong fortified line. This line ran from well to the north of Jaffa on the Maritime Plain, across the Judean Hills to Beer north of Jerusalem, and continued eastwards of the Mount of Olives, with the capture of the road from Beersheba to Jerusalem via Hebron and Bethlehem, together with substantial Ottoman territory south of Jerusalem. The city was secured. On the 11th of December, General Edmund Allenby humbly entered the Old City on foot through the Jaffa Gate instead of horse or vehicles to show respect for the Holy City. He was the first Christian in many centuries to control Jerusalem, which is a very important site for many faiths. The Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, David Lloyd George, described the capture as a Christmas present for the British people. The battle was a great morale boost for the British Empire. Background: British General Edmund Allenby, Commander-in-Chief of the Egyptian Expeditionary Force, had won a decisive victory against the German General Erich von Falkenhayn, commander of Ottoman forces in Palestine, at the Battle of Moga Ridge on the 13th of November. The British Empire victory forced von Falkenhayn to withdraw his 7th and 8th armies and move his headquarters from Jerusalem to Nablus on 14 November. As the Ottoman Third Corps reached Jerusalem via the Hebron Road after its defeat at Beersheba, it was ordered to develop defences around Jerusalem. This corps held the city while the 20th Corps retreated from Junction Station into the Judean Hills towards Jerusalem. As they retired, the 20th Corps left strong rear guards to stop or slow the British advance. Time was needed to construct defences and for reorganisation of the depleted and disorganised 7th Army. When they arrived in the city, 20th Corps took over responsibility for Jerusalem's defences, while 3rd Corps continued to move northwards from Jerusalem along the Nablus Road. The British War Cabinet had cautioned Allenby not to commit to any operations that might not be sustainable in the long term if the strength of British forces in the area could not be maintained. Their concerns were possibly linked to a peace proposal published on the 8th of November by the new Russian Bolshevik government between Russia and Germany. The document, scheduled to be signed on 3 March 1918, would constitute a separate peace treaty and result in the withdrawal of all Russian troops from the war. All German forces on the Eastern Front could then turn their attention to fighting British and French forces elsewhere. Allenby was aware of the lack of accurate maps of the Judean Hills and that the history of previous campaigns in the region gave clear warnings against hasty or lightly supported assaults on the strong western ramparts. His frontline forces had been fighting and advancing for an extended period, fighting many miles from their bases, and were tired and depleted. Now 35 miles from the railhead at Deir el-Bila, Allenby's troops did not have a line of defensive entrenchments behind which they could stop a concerted push by these two Ottoman armies. Such a counterattack could well see them driven back to Gaza and Beersheba. However, Allenby reviewed the threat of counterattack and his supply situation and decided a force large enough to attack into the Judean Hills and another separate force to operate on the maritime plain could be maintained far from base. He decided to quickly attack Fevzi Pasha's Ottoman 7th Army in the Judean Hills with the hope of capturing Jerusalem. This would keep pressure on this army in the hope of denying them time to complete their reorganization, dig deep trenches, or worst of all, counterattack. Prelude. British Empire supply lines. The planned advance into the Judean Hills would rely heavily on the ability of the lines of communications to keep the front-line troops supplied with food, water and ammunition. However, these were already operating at considerable distances from the railhead and base areas, and as a result the advance was forced to pause on the 17th of November to enable supplies to be brought forward by columns under Corps control, which had been sent back to railhead for rations and supplies. Transporting supplies forward from railhead was a slow but continuous 24-hour-a-day business, because the Ottoman army had destroyed as much of their infrastructure as they could during their retreat. Only lorries of the British Army Service Corps Motor Transport Companies and camels of the Egyptian Camel Transport Corps could use the single, narrow, poorly metalled road from Gaza to Junction Station. Between Gaza and Beit Hanun the road was unsealed and deep in sand, making it difficult for lorries to proceed, even with a light load of 1 ton. Supplies were also shipped by sea and landed at Wadi Suker, and later at Jaffa. Lack of infrastructure at Jaffa meant all supplies brought via ship had to be cross-loaded onto surf boats, which then had to be unloaded on the beaches. Such operations were heavily dependent on the weather, so the amount of supplies transported by sea was limited. But feeding an army dependent on horses was a huge task. The marching ration of a horse was 9.5 pounds of grain a day. Even this small amount, which lacked any bulk food, when multiplied by the 25,000 horses in the desert-mounted corps, worked out at over 100 tons of grain a day. 100 lorries would be needed for the horses as well as transportation for rations required by the troops in the front line. All available lorries and camels were organized in convoys moving north from the railhead along the Gaza to Junction Station road from Deir el-Bila to El Mejdal and then on to Julius, where the 26 and 27 Depot Unit of Supply set up advanced supply dumps to serve the Australian Mounted Division and the Anzac Mounted Division. From these dumps the transport sections of 5 Company and the 32nd, 33rd, and 34th Companies served the Anzac Mounted Division, and the 35th, 36th, and 37th Companies served the Australian Mounted Division. These companies of horse and mule-drawn wagons could operate to serve their brigades during brigade operations and when required could form into divisional trains during divisional operations. A forward lorry head was established at Ramla, where the loads were dumped and the transport companies distributed the supplies to the forward units. Members of the Egyptian Labour Corps worked alongside the Australian Army Service Corps transporting, loading, and unloading the general service and limber wagons of supplies ordered by the brigades. The huge endeavor was administered by the supply sections in a similar fashion to the divisional ammunition columns, which also worked to supply ammunition to the fighting units in a similarly continuous operation. Advance by the Desert Mounted Corps continues. On 15 November the commander of Desert Mounted Corps, Lieutenant General Sir Harry Chauvel, issued orders for the Yeomanry Mounted Division and the Anzac Mounted Division to continue the advance on Ramla and Lud, about 5 miles from Junction Station. On the same day the Yeomanry Mounted Division reached the Jerusalem Road after a cavalry charge by the 6th Mounted Brigade at Abu Shusha. This charge has been described as even more daring than that at Moga Ridge, owing to the rocky nature of the ground over which the horsemen attacked. The New Zealand Mounted Rifles Brigade secured the left flank of the EEF by occupying Jaffa on 16 November. This city was captured as a result of the victory at Ain Kara 2 days earlier, which forced the Ottoman 8th Army to withdraw over the Nahr, which enters the sea 4 miles north-northeast of Jaffa. The 8th Army's withdrawal placed them to the north of the Ottoman 7th Army and opened up that army's right flank to attack. As a result, the 7th Army was forced to move further away from the coastal sector into the Judean hills. Here, in front of Jerusalem, Ottoman infantry units created a defensive screen.